Good day, everyone. Happy Saturday. This is Facebook Live Birth Moms Real Talk podcast. My name is D. Yvonne Rivers. I am your host for Birth Moms Real Talk. This is the Triad. We're talking to adoptees, birth moms, adoptive mom about trauma. There is no playbook. Maybe we'll come up with one today, but there is no playbook. We're going to talk about how trauma affects all of us. We're going to hear some stories. We're going to talk about different things that maybe that we can do. First of all, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for all of those who have tuned into the podcast. We're growing, we're growing, we're growing. Our numbers are going up each and every week. And for tuning into this Facebook Live, because this is where you get a chance to really share your opinion, your story, all things that can help all of us. Because only through conversation can we transform lives. And it's up to all of you. No matter what position you may hold in a triad, your story matters. Your story counts. It's really an opportunity for all of us to really heal. I like to say Birth Moms Real Talk podcast is a place of grace and healing. So we give grace and we look forward for healing. And healing is a lifelong journey. And it is a journey. So we invite you to come along with the journey with us. So we're first going to introduce our guests. We'll have them to introduce themselves. And I'm going to call on Jennifer first. This is your first time on Facebook Live with us. Been trying to get you on here for a while. So share with us who you are. When I say what you are, part of the triad, some of your experience, just whatever you want to choose to share right now.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, Jennifer Diane Ghostin is my name. And I was born and raised in Chicago. So I'm an adoptee that was in foster care for her first 2 years and then permanently placed by 1967. And wonderful family. Grew up with a really great childhood, but I always wanted to know who my original family was, who my birth mother was. And so fast forward, Illinois had a lot of strict laws back then. In the closed system, I had no way of getting an original birth certificate or any information about my original identity. So it would be around 2010 when Illinois changed their adoption law. And I would then be able to access my original birth certificate. And there I learned my birth mother's name. And it was that information and the help of a search angel that I was in reunion with my birth family by 2012. My birth mother had been deceased for many, many years. She died in 1996. And so I would have to learn of her through extended family members. So I met my brother. He's 22 months younger than me. And aunts and cousins. And I learned a lot about the fact that they had always known about me. So that makes a big difference when you are in reunion and it's not been a secret and it's not been something like, who are you again? They knew exactly who I was, and they wanted to get to know me, and I have certainly wanted to get to know them. And so we have a harmonious relationship all these years later. Honeymoon stage definitely is over, but that's okay. And I think that it's about what's possible. So it was heartbreaking not to be able to meet my birth mother again, but I feel like there were so many good things that came out of search and reunion. So in 2017, I did a DNA test, and it was that same year that I was able to find my paternal birth family. My birth father was deceased. He had died in 1990. So both my birth parents lived very short lives, in my opinion. And still, I met and learned a lot about them through other people. And so that's like the short version of a big story. But yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Very good. Now, she didn't mention that Jennifer runs a podcast. You want to talk about your podcast? Share what that's about?
So yeah, thank you. I started a podcast around the same time as you did, Yvonne, last year, and it was to really highlight the stories of adoptees and adoptee allies. So I've got over 60 episodes on Once Upon a Time in Adoptee Land, and it's been such a rewarding experience because I believe that storytelling is healing for the listener and the storyteller. And so we want, as adoptees, we want to get the true narrative of our experience as adoptees, and that's what I'm a part of. And I just feel like it's meaningful work, just like what you're doing with your podcast,
Absolutely.
Yvonne.
Absolutely. I'm getting some static in the background. Is that any of you or what's going on? Okay, it stopped. Very good. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for introducing yourself. I see Nan. Welcome, Nan, for joining us. She rounds out the triad as being an adoptive mom. But we're going to now go to Lene, who's a birth mom. So if you share a little bit about your story, then we're going to go to Nan, then we're going to get Kitty in.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. My name is Linnea Krikovich. I am a birth mother of 31 years now, reunited over 19 years, and now have 5 grandchildren. Um, it's been a roller coaster and it's been difficult. And I started advocating for birth mothers for the simple fact that I think people misconceptions of who we are and the choice that we made has been diluted. And it's not really honored and looked upon as being a good decision. So it's something I kind of been advocating for and try to talk more about the roller coasters of our life after we choose to place.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Lene. Nan, welcome to our
Thank
first
you.
time having you with our live Facebook and coming in and talking with the triad. We do this once a month to try to have everyone on the triad. So if you want to come back again, typically the fourth week, fourth Saturday of each month. But welcome. So share a little bit about your story, who you are, when you became an adoptive mom, and what you choose to share.
Okay, so I'm Nan. I well, my husband and I went through a really rough patch in our marriage, and then once we were able to reconcile there, he really wanted to have another child. It was difficult for me to get pregnant to begin with, and I just wasn't sure if I wanted to start over there. So he had looked into adoption, like overseas, and I just really wasn't on board with that. And then we talked about doing fostering. So we started there, and our very first placement was a very sick newborn, and he was born, addicted and some other issues. So we took him in as our first placement, and by the time he was 2, we had adopted him. And I don't know, I've never thought I could love a child as much that I didn't give birth to until I met this kid.
Uh,
He's
wow.
he's amazing, and he really rounds out our family. I mean,
Good.
we've had our struggles, things have been up and down, but just I don't know, being an adoptive mom was never something I really was on board with, but I fell in love with this kid. I
Wow.
did. And I
Very
definitely
good.
would advocate for anyone to go that route if they're having, any thoughts about wanting more kids and they're not sure or whatever, but start with fostering and see where it leads.
Very good. So how long has he been with you now?
He will be 11
Okay.
this July. We took him into our house when he was 4 months old.
Okay.
So he's been with
Wonderful.
us about
Wonderful.
9.5 years, 10.
Okay. Great. So you have some experiences to input and share. Okay. Kitty, won't you share a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Kitty signing in from upstate New York, and wanted to let you all know that I guess what really brings me here is my beginning. When I was born, I was placed for adoption through a closed adoption agency, and I was 3 weeks in foster care before I arrived at my home. Um, Fast forward, I lived out of state and ended up finding out that I was expecting a child. And through counseling and seeing that I valued my life as an adoptee. I had made the decision to relinquish my son 36 years ago. We've been in reunion for 6 years. 2 months after I had my son, I met my now husband. And a year and a half later, we had our first child, our only daughter. We had three more children after that, three more sons. Our youngest son is 21. And 9 years ago, we were a foster home, and our first placement was this young boy who 2 years later ended up um, coming into our family in a legal way. We were able to adopt him, and 2 months after he was in our home, we had already felt like, wow, you're in our family. So my story, not that I was trying to acquire all these roles, but an adoptee, birth mom, an adoptive mom.
That's just how it turned out.
Yeah.
That's what life is all about. And the title today is Trauma, just trauma, plain trauma regarding adoption, life, and so forth. And we all look at it a different way because we come from different perspective. And again, my name is Yvonne. I'm a birth mom who placed my son in 1973, found him in 2018, and have been in reunion before years this year. Still growing our relationship. It's a step by step, it's a process, it's a lifelong getting to know him. He's getting to know me, and it is a roller coaster. Sometimes up, sometimes down, somewhat sideways. Sometimes I feel like I'm white knuckling. And I don't like roller coasters. Let me just tell you. I think I rode my first roller coaster maybe when I was 10 years old at this amusement park, Kings Dominion, which is not far from where I live. And my last one I rode was probably about 2 years later. It was like this big one, like the Grizzly at Kings Dominion and so forth. And I swore I would never get on a roller coaster again. And I have not, because it takes you up and down and sideways. You don't know whether you're going to be, you may raise your hand simply because you just suddenly jump. And I promise God, if I get off this roller coaster, I'll never get on one again. But here I am in reunion with my son and on another roller coaster with that, not physically, but emotionally. So we want to talk about what is the trauma that's been and has addressed itself, reared its head, and so forth in all the different perspectives. Now, I'd like to get, even before I met my son, I was listening to adoptees from different podcasts, Damon Davis, who really helped me and Jennifer in starting our podcast because he's an adoptee. He's a male adoptee. So I was looking for a perspective that I couldn't get myself as a birth mom. So I want to hear the different perspectives of all of you. When I say trauma, Jennifer, you're an adoptee. What do you hear, or what can you express of what your trauma has been, maybe from birth, or you just share? What is trauma has been in your life? How have you dealt with it?
Yeah, I'm still unpacking just how
Okay.
traumatic it is to be separated from my original family. And I think uh, one of the big things that came out of reunion, particularly on my maternal side, is there's no history. There's no, when people talk about, through the years what they did, like my first cousins, how they got together and enjoyed events and just the ups and downs of living life, they have that history.
Yeah.
And I'm really just listening and cannot relate whatsoever. And vice versa, the things I share with them, they just we haven't been a part of each other's lives. And I just remember feeling such a deep loss in that. And as we build memories going forward, it just doesn't substitute for all the
Right.
lived years. And how I deal with that is to just keep thinking about what's possible in
Mm-hmm.
all my relationships with everybody in the family. And being connected to the adoption community has been a tremendous value to me because other adoptees, all members of the constellations, have helped me to kind of process the grief,
Mm-hmm.
the things that, the questions I'll never have answered,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can talk about it, and other people can share with me how they have handled the feelings the emotions that they have behind the same experiences of loss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's number one, the adoption community being a part of my life. And I have to say that when I first got connected over a decade ago with the adoption community by going to conferences and reading books and just listening to particularly birth parents,
Right.
that was quite healing for me. I remember going to my first adoption conference in Orlando, Florida, and my roommate was a birth mom. And and it was one of the best decisions I could have made, because now I get a perspective that I didn't have before, and it
Mm-hmm.
gave me a lot more understanding of what maybe my birth mother went through. Being pregnant at 16, back in the 60s, and really not making the decision to relinquish, her parents making the decision, and what that must have been like.
Right.
And then through the years, wanting to find me and not being able to. My name was changed and closed
Wow.
records and all of that, and what that must have felt like for her. So connecting with birth moms in particular was very impactful to me, and still is.
Okay.
And reading Ann Fessler's The Girls That Went Away
Yeah.
was, it was like I was empathetic. Like I now, it's not just about me.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Kitty, how about you? You've got different perspectives to process trauma.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to work from the present and follow that thread back, because it's been in the present that I've started to be mindful. Why do I react that way?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I wound up over this? Why do I have hurt feelings when I don't need to really, look at it that way? So it's the adoptee in me, as the seed of trauma would probably be what is being tended to now. Um, my adoptive dad passed away when I was 11. So there was also that um, loss again. And I think at that point in my life, I probably learned to disassociate a lot, um, in situations that weren't comfortable for me, so that I could still move forward. And I'm more of a people pleaser. So I
Wow.
don't want to, have a temper tantrum or have a fit or make somebody uncomfortable, because what if I lose my place again?
So was that
So
fear? Was that fear causing you to feel that way?
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And it was fear from the very beginning. I had no control over losing my place to begin with, but
Right.
how would I know that the next set of parents would be so
Right.
committed and invested? Could I trust?
Let me ask you that, Jennifer. Did you feel some of that same fear?
Um, did I? Oh, Jennifer.
Jennifer.
Okay, I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Kitty was talking about it was she can't do a temper tantrum because what if she's
Oh,
fearful of going to another family? Would that family put up with her or whatever? Did you have any of those fears in
I
growing up?
I really don't think so. Because I've heard other adoptees express that. I
Okay.
never felt like, uh, yeah, if I don't stay in line, or
Okay.
am just right, things won't work here. They'll get rid. I don't remember. Now maybe I did, and I just don't remember. But I have heard many adoptees say that.
Okay. Just was wondering. Go ahead, Katie. Katie, you
Yeah,
can go ahead.
So that was, yeah. So there's still trauma that the I guess the effects of it
Right.
still spill out here and there. And just most recently, my birthday was this month, and all of the many years past, I had held these expectations that I wanted people to treat me a certain way, but I always kept them within me and never shared them,
Mm,
because did people really care about me to know? And what if they didn't carry through? How would I handle that?
mhm.
So I used this sort of, actually, it was my birth son that said, uh, you're a little I forgot I think I told you before, Yvonne. I am,
You said anxious? Was it anxious?
no, what is it when you're contradictory, where you hold back, but then you give? Y'all can help me with this.
Okay. We'll figure out the word, but that was what you was
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah.
Okay.
If anybody comes up with it, yeah, you can continue.
Okay. So in other words, you were fearful of expressing your request or need, thinking that you wouldn't get it.
I was passive aggressive. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay. In other words, they're supposed to know what you want.
Yeah. And it was like
Like they can read your mind, right?
yeah. And then I set myself up to
Uh-huh.
be discouraged and upset each year for my birthday.
Uh-huh.
And finally, this year, I got a hold of it. And I
Okay.
said, okay, whatever anybody wants to do to bless me, I will receive it. I have no preconceived notions of what should happen to me, whatever.
Okay.
And I was pleasantly surprised.
Okay. Okay. So you created your own new narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. And we all have that opportunity of doing it, of setting that precedent and narrative that whatever it is, it's okay. Whatever it is, it's okay. And I think we all, some parts of us will just say, because I always say that I don't have any preconceived or expectations that my son has to call it. We got to talk this certain time or whatever. But it's like in just going through the whole thing of the journey. I'm enjoying the journey, not looking for a specific destination, but I'm enjoying the journey. Okay, good, good. Now, Lene, what's trauma for you as a birth mom?
Wow, that's really kind of an open-ended question.
Yeah.
I, I that word's kind of like a weird word because trauma, I think, is really different for each and every person and how it affects them. I think that for me, with all these years, I kind of look at reliving that emotions or those feelings that trigger me is kind of like an onion. It's just like life. There's several different layers, and depending on what's happening in my life or what's happening with my birth daughter's life and her parents or the grandkids, it's a constant layer that I thought I had gotten over. It's just a more in-depth layer because it's more of an understanding the older I get and the more I learn, I'm able to kind of manage those triggers a little bit. So I'm not um, I'm not taking my breath away of, oh my gosh, how do I deal with this? And a lot of the stuff that I've had to learn was finding grace with myself and the younger part of myself. And that's really tough to do because there's a lot of guilt that I think people like to point fingers a lot of times at the birth mothers, and no effect to any adoptees in particular, but we did what we thought was best at the time for choosing to place our child for adoption. And it's really difficult for people to understand that narrative. And with my daughter in particular, she's so angry because her perception is you didn't want me. And she really has the hard time accepting the word placement versus giving up. And it's been kind of one of those guilt trips where as we want to we're people pleasers, unfortunately, and we give on a continual basis. And I think that starts from when we choose to place our child for adoption. We don't realize that we keep emptying ourselves. And I kept giving and giving and giving in hopes that that would be reciprocated with the intention of being reciprocated. And I've learned throughout the years and several layers of that onion with all the tears that come with it is I can't have that expectation, and that I have to set healthy boundaries for myself, which is a totally different learning process of what does that mean and how does that affect me and how do I stick to those boundaries and what do I need for me to find a healthy place to not take on maybe their guilt and their frustration, but still be compassionate enough to understand their situation and not to blame myself, because I think people in general, we want to blame somebody else for it, then take responsibility for our own actions. And I think that it's a back and forth thing, and it's definitely something that deserves an open, honest communication. Without
Absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
that grief is just like it's a constant ripping off the Band-Aid, and there's no healing that's involved. So
Yeah. The whole platform of the podcast, Birth Moms Real Talk, to hear the stories of birth moms. but
Mhm.
also in what they went through, the decision of making. Because until adoptees, and I go back, you had no decision. You were a newborn. You were a newborn, but you had a history. You had a history of 9 months being grown into your with your mother, your biological, your birth mom, your natural mom, whatever word you choose to use. So you had no decision. The birth mom was faced with a decision
Mhm.
that she did the best she knew, as they say, that particular time.
Mhm.
Then coming back to adoptive moms, Nan, I'm calling on you. And I say this, I'll make this a statement, and I'm gonna go back round robin back to you, Jennifer. With being an adoptive mom, what was your perception of that child who came to you at 4 months old? The legacy, the history, I'll just say history of that child, of recognizing where they came from, whether that child was going through grief and trauma when you got them at 4 months,
Mhm.
and your perception of it and how to deal with it.
Yeah, so he was born at 29 weeks. So he was born premature,
Okay.
addicted, lots of trauma while he was in the womb.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I figured we'd swoop in, bring him into a nice, safe, quiet home. He'd be all good. He'd grow up, be this wonderful, loving boy, and it's just not how it's turned out. He carries a lot of trauma, and a lot of
Right.
that trauma he carries is directed at me. He's never
Okay.
met his birth mom, and he never will now because she passed away last summer from an overdose.
Oh
She
wow.
never stopped using. It was never a safe environment to even bring him to ever see her in visitations before he was adopted. Um, and he, although when she passed away, he says it didn't bother him. He didn't know her. He didn't care, but it did show in his behavior a bit. And he's this past month's been pretty good, knock on wood. But he carries a lot of that anger that he probably
Hmm.
still has toward her. He carries a lot of that out on me.
Hmm.
So it's always been a very, I mean, like I said, I fell in love with this kid. He was still in the NICU. We hadn't even brought him home yet. He had had surgery, and he was hooked up to all these tubes and wires and stuff. And I just fell totally head over heels in love with this kid.
Right.
And I've just
Right.
poured my heart out to him. And
Right.
just sometimes to have the way he, treats me is just so, it's hard. But I know
Mm.
that he comes from, he comes by it naturally. A lot of it, he probably doesn't even understand himself.
Hmm. Hmm. And all of you have just expressed how trauma affects all the different triads. And the statement you said, Nan, that you will swoop in, give them a good home, good life, and everything will be Alice in Wonderland. And I go back to that scenario that's painted for birth moms. Oh, you place your child and you can just go away and you'll just forget all about them because you never will see them again. And it's where you are at that time on whether you believe and drink the Kool-Aid, I like to say, or you have your own perspective of what I am going to do. I placed my son because I did not have support from my family. I always believed I'd see him, meet him. Had no clue. Had no clue, as you say, for his things of clothes, as Jennifer was saying, or mom searching for children, don't always find them, and all of that. So you're dealing with all of that causes trauma. And just as you mentioned, Nan, of being addicted and all of that and born premature, that's additional. That's additional. Adoptees, just the fact that and I don't know whether I was on a session last, I forget where I'm at. I was on a session Thursday night, last night, and then today. It's like you don't know a lot of times how the trauma affects you, or the fact that when you're, whether it's the word of pull away from your family or don't know your family. I remember my son when I first met him and we first connected. It's like I didn't know who you were. It was like, and he wasn't told. He found out when he was 13. I didn't know who you were. It was like I could just imagine it, him at that age is like, where did I come from? Who am I really? you know, what am I made of? And all of those. That's trauma. I heard someone describe actually today, I was on a session earlier today, that trauma is something at that particular time that you just can't deal with. It overwhelms you. So it's a trauma. It's something so, and it's trauma. It's trauma for a lot of different things. So we use that word even to the point of PTSD, post-traumatic stress, that it's like so much going on, it becomes overwhelming for you. And it can happen in a lot of circumstances, not even just with the adoption. I mean, I tell my story, and some of you have been connected. I had surgery in December. There was a mass found on my kidney. It was ended up being cancer. It was taken out. No chemo, no radiation. My oldest brother, died on February 11th. I moved in the meantime. Had a cousin who was like a big sister for me that she passed on March 13th, the anniversary of my mom's death 36 years ago. I've been through a lot to the point that it was trauma, overwhelm. And I think I don't know if I shared this with you, Kitty, or not. I washed one load of clothes about 2 Saturdays ago, took them from a washer and put it into another washer. What was I thinking? Then at the end of that wash cycle, I opened the door and I said, the clothes still wet. And I looked up, Yvonne, you put it in another washer. So I washed a load of clothes twice, so my mind was obviously not focused. And I'm actually doing a podcast at 1 o'clock today with another birth mom that I taped her podcast that same day, forgot to save it and download it. So when trauma hits you, you don't know, you don't have control. It is overwhelming. And so the question too is, there is no playbook. That's why I asked all of you about what are you doing? What are you consistently doing? And I hear support and all that. We have to continue to do that. And what we always want to discuss here, what are some other avenues and so forth. Now I've got a list. It's not questions, but comments. I want some get input. This was an article online that was what adoptees want birth parents to do. Now I want to get the perspective from both sides, the adoptees and the birth parents and adoptive parents. This is coming from adoptees. So the adoptees, Jennifer and Kitty, I want to hear, be patient and don't back away. Number 2, try to indulge our curiosity as things that people who are not adopted take for granted. That meeting you is opening up a whole new world, and we need to be able to assimilate into our current lives. Own up to your truth as well as your child's truth. Be compassionate to us. We may have had a great life or a bad one. You may have placed us out of necessity or coercion, but this is a big thing for us. Number 5, understand we aren't all gold diggers or murderers or stalkers. We want to find a part of ourselves we have never known to see a face that looks like ours. Number 6, share the information you have. Many of us don't have access to accurate records, and holding that information because it's painful is painful for us too. Don't make us beg or plead for our information, and don't hold it over our heads either. Comments, adoptees and birth moms. Any of that true?
That list is amazing. I love that list. And the word that comes up for me is, be transparent and don't think that anything is not important.
Okay.
Yeah, everything matters to us in terms of information. We want the truth, we want information, and we want connection. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No matter how hard it is for the birth mom to share that. You agree that, Lene, your birth mom? And I want to hear from Kitty too, because she's both of them too. And from you, Dan.
Yeah, I can say from my own personal experience, because my adoption was based on a date rape. Mm-hmm. And so when I first met my daughter, she wanted all the information right then and there. I mean, it was just overwhelming for not just me, but you could see it was overwhelming for her. And then to have to give her those details, even though her parents had known and not told her, it was just, you could see the feeling of overload and the feeling of, exhaustion and the excitement all at the same time. And then you could see every emotion that was going through her. And then it was me having to purge up my past to explain to her. And it took a lot of patience from my side, but it took a lot of energy out of me in addition, because I had to walk away and relive that whole motion, let alone she was swallowing an elephant of information. So especially knowing about how she was conceived and the choice that I had made. And it was really hard for me because it took me probably not quite a good 15 years before I really told her about her biological father, because you could see she just was not in a good place to really want that. I mean, she wanted the information, but did she really need that information?
Right.
And it was a real tug of war with my heart and with doing what I thought was best for her. And then eventually when she got into her 20 years, I think she was about 22, 23, I finally just said, here you go. And unfortunately her biological father overdosed and died too. And she didn't get that opportunity to meet with them, but she struggles with drugs and alcohol herself. So it's really hard because it puts us as birth mothers in an awkward position, especially if we don't know if there's a good communication with the adoptive parents, what they have, talked about, what they were given information on, and how they presented that to the adoptee. So I think all those questions are great. I think they're amazing. And I think they're very, very true. And I think being honest and open communication, but it goes to all three sides.
Yes.
It has to start from a very, very beginning, hopefully with the adoptive parents. So it isn't so much of swallowing an elephant when the adoptee gets older, because that's a lot to swallow in your, late teens, if not early 20s. And it's even worse, I think, as you get older, because you've got all these feelings and emotions that you've carried all these years. So I guess that's why I'm a big advocate of talk to your adoptive parents and, arm them with the great information, and hopefully they convey it. And I say that hopefully because we have no control. We don't know what's being said to them.
Right.
In hopes that they tell the adoptee, because I think the adoptee does need to know about their story. They need to know where they came from. They need to know their story in an honest and open communication, because you've got to find a way to accept all of that.
And along with what you're saying, Lene, I'll say this: trauma sometimes, and a lot of times, prohibits people in sharing all the information. Kitty and Nan, I want to hear from you regarding these questions and regarding for what you're doing, not only as a birth mom for each one of you, or for mom or adoptive mom with it. Because Nan, you've sort of referenced to your son of his mom is passed and it didn't affect him. It did. We all know it did.
Oh, it definitely did.
How you can deal with that. And Kitty, would you chime in after that? Yeah.
Yeah. So we've always tried to paint his history, as nicely as we could without, making his parents seem like bad people, because we don't want him to feel bad about himself because of it. I know eventually he'll get the truth. I mean, he's got siblings that he doesn't even know about. And I've been in contact with them because there's one that's in her early 20s and she wants to meet Jacob really bad. And she's not in a good place either. So I've always told her, once she's got her head on right, I'm happy to let them know each other, but it's just not safe for him right now. Okay. So I know eventually he will meet her at least, and he will know about his parents, but it's just, we're trying to protect him now. But, sure. And like Lene said, you have to give them a little bit at a time. You have to get them what you can handle, what they can handle, because you still have to protect them, even, especially when he's young. I mean, my boy's only 10 right now, so it's still, really hard at this age to know the good balance.
Yeah. And it takes everybody, the whole triad, to understand and do their work to be able to do that.
Kitty. It's really weird because it's like a double-edged sword, right? Where it's just like you feel like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. You just hope as a parent that you make the right choice with the least amount of impact. But realistically, you just don't know. And that's a hard thing to swallow.
It's a hard thing to swallow, because when you say choice, we've got to be ready to make that choice. Yeah. How about you?
And Jake's been seeing a therapist since he was 5. So we are, we've got her input and everything we do too, which is really helpful.
Good.
So first of all of these statements that you had said, Yvonne, these are the very things that are being discussed in adoptee support groups.
Good.
And a lot of adoptees are struggling with, why can't my um, biological mom, just be straight with me. Why is there this really pretty picture painted when I don't think it's authentic?
Yeah.
So yes, there's truth to that, but then as for my personal self as an adoptee with my birth mom, she had a hard time. I think there were parts of her that she hadn't reconciled, and her own shame really kept her in this cocoon of keeping herself safe and at that risk of pushing me away.
Right.
So we never had a healthy relationship, although we knew each other for um, 13 years before she passed away. And it
Wow.
was, we met each other once. We probably had a dozen emails and maybe 2 phone calls.
Wow. Transparency, Jennifer say, authentic conversation, being truthful, sharing with your child. All of that can come about and only when you've done your work or you have people in there. Now that was six. So let me move on, and we got some more. Number seven, understand that this is like adoptees. Understand that many of us consider the people who raise us our parents. Don't disparage them to us. Number eight, if you have placed and not reunited, please give any medical information to the agency as soon as you can and keep it updated. This information doesn't just affect us, but our children and theirs as well. From the time that my son was maybe 5 or 6, and I mentioned this last night, that I started sending letters to the Department of Social Services of the state that I placed for just in case, that I think majority age at that time was 21, that if he looked for me, he would have that. And I updated every year, addresses and so forth, because I wanted to give all the opportunity for him to find me and to get information, because he's part of me. That's that heritage, that history, that legacy. And when I met him, the year I met him at his birthday, my gift to him was his family tree, for him to know his family tree. So that's number eight. Number nine, excuse me, temper any expectations of what is expected of us being your child. Don't set any that they've got to do this, they've got to do that. Number 10, stand in your own pain as I am having to stand in my own pain as a result of the circumstances. Number 11, don't harbor guilt about us. It will only interfere with us getting to know each other. Don't refer to us as the one mistake you made back in the day. How about those statements?
Yeah, definitely. When I think of guilt and shame being probably the worst between the two, um, yeah, that could definitely impede moving or leaning into a healthy relationship.
Mhm.
One thing I wanted to say too is that I wish my adoptive parents had brought it up. How are you feeling as an adoptee and
Right,
being separated from your original family, and just like allowed space
right.
for me to say, "Oh, I'm okay today," or just give me time, to kind of just think about, yeah, how do I feel? That was something I did not have, and I think can't speak for all adoptees, but most of the ones from my era, we didn't get that. It
Right,
was like you
right.
weren't to talk about your original family. You weren't to really have any questions about anything.
Mhm.
So,
I think that some of the same thing you're talking about is that the adopted parents felt, or maybe were told or thought they couldn't bring up your history. Just like I know I, as a birth mom, is like, don't talk about the fact that you had a child and just move on, move forward, leave it alone. That's secrets. Keep it a secret. It'll be okay if you keep it a secret, but when you bring it up, that's where the problem starts. Any other
yeah,
comments about those?
I love, Jennifer, the way you said that, and Kitty, I was kind of going to go back to a little bit of things that you've been saying. I think that as birth mothers in particular, there's still a huge lack of really support after placement. And a lot of times we as birth mothers don't want that support, especially if it's done through an agency or a state agency, to sort of find a really good therapist or counselor to have to manage those emotions and feelings. For the most part, we've learned to suppress them and we've learned to swallow them. And then, as Yvonne says, in time, when it comes up, we're supposed to regurgitate this elephant that we were swallowing for all these many years. And for a lot of us birth mothers, that's really tough to do, because that's having to face a decision and a choice that was so hurtful for us. We don't know how to regurgitate it. We don't know how to face it or talk about it. And so I think for adoptees, I think it's very difficult, because you want answers, you want decisions, you want answers, you want transparency, you want all these questions answered. But it also has to realize, and it comes again from all three sides, of having enough grace also and patience, of understanding that maybe she or he, whoever, if you meet both parents, maybe they weren't capable and been taught how to process these emotions. And your
Most
journey,
have not. Let's just say
absolutely
that.
not.
Most have not.
No.
Assume not.
And
Assume not.
so it makes sense that adoptees are angry and frustrated and they want all this information. But I can honestly say it's not that they don't want this relationship, and it's not that they don't love you, and it's not that they didn't ever love you. It's they don't know how to process this part of their lives. They legitimately swallowed it to the point that it created numerous types of personality disorders, emotional disorders that they probably have no concept of even existing. And you showing up after so many years, not getting the help or processing those emotions, they just completely just shut down. So Kitty, I feel bad, because I can only imagine what your mom went through. But at the same time, I hope that you can find time, and I shouldn't say time, find enough grace and forgiveness within yourself for her to know that she just didn't know how to cope with it. She didn't have the tools. I mean, we're still struggling finding the tools of having to move forward and finding a healthy place as birth mothers, let alone adoptees. You guys are finding out, what these emotions and feelings are. And then adoptive parents are having to learn what they could and could not share and what's appropriate and inappropriate. So is this
Let me finish
quagmire?
up.
How do we make sense of this quagmire? So
Thank you, Lene. Let me finish up again. Five more, and we really need to finish up at 1 o'clock. Number 12. Please don't keep us a secret. Your brothers, your sisters, children, and parents are our blood too. Number 13, we're both going to feel emotionally overwhelming from time to time. When this happens, find someone to talk to about it. Clergy, friend, psychologist, support group, however, do not lash out at me, meaning adoptee, and say you would rather the reunion had not occurred, like it's too much. Number 14, don't hide the name of our birth fathers, if you have it. Whatever the relationship you had with them doesn't affect that I have with them, because we should be allowed to find them if we wish. After all, they have our history too. And number 15, giving us or placing us isn't the end of the story. While we understand there may have been extenuating circumstances the first time, the second time there shouldn't be. Don't reject us. And number 16, protect and stand up for children's civil rights. Speak out for equal access to original birth certificates whenever possible, and be our advocate. Now, that was a whole lot, but you know what? It affects all of us, the adoptees, the birth moms, and how we can deal with that. Because when you've been fed a lot of stuff throughout the years, how you received it is based on what that soil was where it being planted. Our past with relationship, I came from a non-communicative family. So if I kept on that same path, I wouldn't have been talking about it either. Whereas I took the stance, I'm going to talk about it, whether people listen to me or not. And you have to determine for us how you're going to grow yourself. So we're going to wind up now, but any last thoughts about what we've talked about today in dealing with trauma, whatever perspective, adoptee, birth mom, adoptive mom? Give us some last thoughts.
I wanted to sort of just, in honor of my birth mom, say, yeah, I do know, what she had gone through. She wasn't raised by her parents either. And as I proceeded through and became a birth mom myself, I was able to learn from that. So yeah, I'm good with, how it went on, but I wanted to sort of put a nice closure to that. But Lene, thank you though for sharing your thoughts on that.
Final thoughts, everyone. Lydia,
Well,
you commented, you say you love me, but what do you think? What do you think, Lydia? I know you. I'm not sure with your birth mom adoptee because I get all kinds of emails from all different perspectives. So, Lydia, put your thoughts in the comments also. Go ahead, Nan or Jennifer, on what we've talked about today.
yeah, I just wanted to say, Lene, I really appreciate what you shared, from a birth mother's perspective, that it is a lot going on. And we as the adoptees, yeah, we want to know right now, right? Give it all to us. What I think too is that it just depends on the person, because some people, yeah, can handle it all. Like I personally, I want to know the truth, as difficult as it may be. But the next adoptee, it may be a bit overwhelming to hear all of that so quickly. So I really appreciate what you said. Yeah, to extend grace. Yes.
Yeah, and I always appreciate hearing all these other perspectives too. And I'm just very thankful that we opted to get Jacob into therapy at a young age to keep a lot of these lines of communication open in a safe space for him, and to know the right ways, like when his mom passed away, to go to our therapist and say, what do we do with this? Because we really didn't know whether or not we should tell him and how we should tell him if we did. So we did it in her office with her, which was really nice. And the therapist that we have is amazing because she's got 5 adopted children from foster care too. So she's lived the life, and it's really great to bounce stuff off her in, kind of a mom to mom kind of thing too. So she helps me as well as she helps him.
Very good. Very good. So wrapping this up, there definitely is trauma. Each one of you have your own perspectives as well as, I say, pathway that you're working through it as it comes, because it's not consistent. You can't expect it. You don't know. Sometimes it'll overwhelm you. And my response is sit down, Yvonne. Just sit down, And I give myself self-care. Fridays at typically after 1:00. Kitty, yesterday it was a whole day, so it was, and sometimes it's just like that. But you have to give yourself what you need, and that you can become, as I think I'd said to Jennifer before we started, is that my role and my goal is to be the very best person I can be for me and my son and the rest of the world. So final thoughts. I want to thank all of you for being on and being brave enough to be live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube and talking about this, because most people are not. Most people are not, but I see the healing. I've seen the healing, and I know, just as you commented, Jennifer, for how blessed it's been for us and having a podcast for me, right, since June of last year. And the many people, and I was hoping Lydia would come in and say something, because she listens to the podcast, she sends comments, and I believe she's an adoptee. But I just love it. It's just been so heartwarming, and I see the breakthrough that so many people are getting just by listening, as we say, to other birth moms, adoptive moms, adoptees. You don't know if you're not sitting in those shoes or walking in those shoes. You have no clue. You have no clue. So listen to people who've gone through it. Even like Nan, you're saying, your therapist that walked in your shoes, so you can then know they understand. Whereas a lot of times people around us who are not involved in the adoption community or constellation, they don't understand us. I think I mentioned last night in the session I was on, when I did find my son, I wrote a letter to, I think I brought it up, wrote a letter to my friends, my close circle. And I said, dear friend, God has performed a tremendous miracle in my life. He's granted me the desires of my heart that I've had for over 45 years. He's brought back to me my son, who was placed for adoption in 1973. We've been in reunion for over a year. This is a time of praise and process of this miracle right before my eyes. My emotions are on a roller coaster right now. right? And I pray gratitude, peace, and sanity each day. I'm sometimes quiet and want to be alone as I process this relationship. It sometimes seems so surreal that I pinch myself and I thank God one more time. Please feel free to talk to me and ask me about my son. Adoption has been such a closed secret through many generations. It stops with me and my generation as I shout and tell the world that I have a son. No more secrets or hush hush. I declare freedom from the hidden secrets of families and society. I have a son, and he has children. I've not met them yet I'm standing on the promises that I will. Please pray for me and my son as we journey together through building this relationship. Through the healing process when we met last year is a journey and sometimes overwhelming. I'm a proud mother, so ask me about him. It helps to talk about him. Ask me to lunch sometimes or just call me just to show me that you are my friend. So I told people what I needed. And they're not, as Katie said, passive aggressive or assume they know. But once I tell them, that doesn't mean they're going to do it now. So I had to really come to terms with that. Though some did, some didn't, but it was okay. But I got, I guess, deliverance and peace by saying, this is who I am and this is what I want. Thank you all for being on today. I'll be calling on you again. But stay tuned and watch Birth Moms Real Talk. Follow us. And when you listen to the podcast, give us a review. Share that with others so we can build our numbers even more. It's just making such a life changing difference. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.